So this is lesson A2U1L6 on compound inequalities. What is a compound inequality? Well, it is two or more inequalities that are graphed on the same number line. And we have two different types. There's the OR, which is a union, and the AND, which looks like this, upside down U, and that's an intersection. Graphically, what that looks like is for an OR, you would have two lines go in opposite directions because it's going to be either one or the other of these. Now for your intersection, that's when you have two lines that go towards each other and there's a section in there that overlaps, and that's the section you want. So that's called the intersection. Now an OR compound inequality will always have the word OR. You will always see that word OR. ANDs problems can have the AND or they may not. So if you don't see an OR, it's not an OR, okay? So let's just look at some problems. Okay, in this first section, which is type 1, we're just going to be looking at the ones that have the OR in it. Graphically, this is what they look like. There's two lines and they both go in opposite directions. Now if I was asked to write this as an inequality, you're going to have two separate phrases with the union symbol in the middle. So how would I write this? Well, x is less than or equal to -4 because it's going that direction, and since it's a solid dot, you have the less than or equal to. Since there's a gap, we're going to put the union symbol, and then this would be x is greater than 2 because that's an open circle and the line goes that direction. All right, interval, you're still going to have two phrases. What are we going to do here? Where does it start on the left? At -infinity, so we're going to have the parenthesis, the -infinity, it ends at -4, and since that's a solid dot, you have a bracket. We're going to use the union symbol, and then down here, it starts at open circle 2, and then it goes all the way to +infinity, which is also a parenthesis. Now, for set notation, we're going to use this, but instead of the union symbol, we're just going to put the word OR. So, we're going to start with a brace, x, such that x is less than or equal to -4, or x is greater than 2. Okay? Okay, let's look at number 1. We have our compound inequality, and we are going to solve and graph and put it in interval notation. So we're going to solve each one separately, just like we've been doing. All right, for this one, I'm going to subtract 4 from each side. So I have 3x is less than or equal to 6. Divide both sides by 3. So I've got x is less than or equal to 2. Or, come over here, divide both sides by 5. So x is greater than 9. So first let's graph it. I start with 2 here, and for 2 to be less than or equal to 0, that means a solid dot, and it's going to go to the left. All right, on the same line, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I'm going to start with 9, open circle, and go to the right, okay? Now for interval notation, look at your two intervals. This one starts here at -infinity, so we're going to have parenthesis, -infinity sign. It goes to +2, and there's going to be a bracket because that's a solid dot. Then we're going to put the union symbol. All right, this one starts with an open circle at 9 and continues on to +infinity, so that's your interval. Okay, on number 2, we have these two inequalities. We're just going to solve each one, graph each answer, and then put it in interval notation. So for the first one, we'll subtract 6 from each side. N is less than or equal to -1. Over here, I'm going to subtract 7 from each side. So 9n is greater than 36. Divide both sides by 9. N is greater than 4. All right, to graph, let's go to -1. This is going to be a solid dot since it has the equals to, and it's going to go to the left-hand end. All right, this one, since it is greater than 4, I'll start at 4. It's going to be an open circle and go that direction. Now, for your intervals, this one starts way down here at -infinity and it goes to -1, and that's a closed circle. Since this is an OR, we're going to put the union symbol. All right, the other interval has an open circle at +4, continues to positive infinity, which has a parenthesis. Okay, let's look at number 3. Once again, we've got 2 inequalities, so let's solve both of these. All right, on this one, we're going to start off, let's get rid of the 8, subtract 8 from each side. So now I have -3y is less than or equal to -15. Now I've got to get rid of the -3, so I'm going to divide by -3. Now what do you do on an inequality when you divide both sides by a negative number? You have to flip that sign. So instead of less than or equal to, it's going to change to greater than or equal to. -15 divided by -3 is +5. All right, let's come over here. Now we're going to add 3 to each side. So now I have 10y is less than or equal to -30. Divide both sides by 10. Now you're not flipping here because you're dividing by a positive number. So, and that'll give you -3, okay? Let's graph them on the same number line. This one is going to start at 5, and it will be a closed circle, and it will go to the right. This one is going to start at -3. It will also be a closed circle, but this one's going to go to the left. See, this is why it's easier to graph your line first before you do intervals, because these are actually ended up in backwards order. All right, your interval over here starts at -infinity, and it goes to -3. Since that's a closed circle, this is a bracket. Since there's a gap, put the U. Since this is a closed circle, you get a bracket. The number is 5, and how far does it go? Well, it goes all the way to positive infinity, which is always a parenthesis. Now let's look at number 4. Let's continue on. Here's your variable this time, so be sure that you're paying attention. So I need to get rid of the 6. The 6 is positive, so to get rid of it, I actually subtract it. Now what I have left is -2a is less than 2. Divide both sides by -2, and paying attention, division by a negative number means I have to flip my sign. So I've got a is greater than -1. All right, over here, I'm going to subtract 1 from each side first to isolate that fraction. So now I have a over 2 is less than -3. Now to get rid of the denominator, I'm going to multiply by 2. So do it on both sides. Now you have a is less than -6. All right, let's graph it on the same number line. If I go -1 for this one, all right, it's an open dot because it's just greater than, and these are the numbers greater than -1, so they go that direction. All right, a is less than -6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's -6. Open dot goes this direction. Now for interval notation, the end of your interval right here is at -infinity, and then the other end is at -6, and it's an open dot, so we have a parenthesis. Here's a gap, so we're going to put a U. All right, this interval, open dot at -1, continues on to positive infinity, parenthesis. Okay, let's look at number 5. We have our 2 separate equations, so let's solve each one. First of all, we're going to distribute the 3 into the parentheses, so that's going to give us 15 minus 6k is less than -12. Then we'll subtract 15 from each side. So now I have -6k is less than -27. Divide both sides by -6, being careful, because that means I have to flip my sign. All right, so now I have k is greater than. Negative over negative is positive, and this reduces down to 9/2, which is 4.5, because that's easier to graph. All right, now let's go over here. When we distribute the 1/3, 1/3 of 15k is 5k, and 1/3 times -9 is -3, less than or equal to -3. All right, let's add 3 to each side. And this is when a lot of you start wondering what you did wrong. Nothing. -3 plus 3 is 0, and 0 is a perfectly legitimate number. So now you have k is less than or equal to 0. All right, let's graph it. First of all, we have 0. If k is less than or equal to that, it's going to be a closed dot over the 0, and it's going to go this direction. All right, now for this one, I'm going to go to in between the 4 and the 5. That's 4.5. And I want an open dot, and it's going to be greater than, so it will go that direction. All right, now let's do our intervals. We're starting down here at -infinity, and it's going to stop at 0, and it's a hard stop, a closed dot, so we're using a bracket. We're going to do the union for the gap. All right, my open dot gets a parenthesis, and that's at 4.5, 4.5, 9/2, whichever one you want to use, and positive infinity, parenthesis. Okay, let's look at number 6 now. Over here on the left, let's get rid of the -3 first. So I'm going to multiply both sides by -3. These two cancel, so now I have 8 minus x. Because I've multiplied by a negative number, I am going to flip my sign from less than to greater than. All right, over here, -5 times -3 is positive 15. Subtract 8 from each side. Now I have -x is greater than or equal to 7, okay? Now I've got to multiply or divide through by -1 because I don't want a negative in front of my variable. So if I multiply both sides by -1, I'm going to get positive x. I have to flip the sign again. Every time you do it, you have to keep flipping the sign. All right? So x is less than or equal to -7. So let's come over here. I'm going to get rid of the 5 first. Subtract 5 from each side. So now I have -3/2 x is less than -6. All right, now I need to get rid of that 3/2. You can do it in 2 steps, but if you're thinking smart, you can multiply by -2/3. That's going to get rid of the negative. It's going to get rid of the 2 and the 3 all in one thing. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we'll deal with that in a minute. All of this cancels out, including the negative, so now I just have x. Now since you multiplied by a negative number, you've got to remember to flip that sign. Okay? Negative times negative is positive. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 divided by 3 is 4. All right, now let's graph it. I'm going to start here at -7. And this is going to be a solid dot. And it's also going to go to the left. These are where the numbers that are less than -7 are. All right, this one starts at 4. It's an open dot, and it's greater than, so it goes to the right. Okay? Interval notation. Parenthesis, -infinity starts here, and it stops at -7, and that's a closed dot, so we need a bracket. Here's a gap, so put the U. All right, this means open dot, so we have parenthesis, 4, and that's going to go to positive infinity, which is parenthesis.